Good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. I am really appreciative of the opportunity to talk to you about ethics in education. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm just going to go through some highlights of education and ethics and how the two really fuse together. All right. Again, so my name is Sean Robinson, and this is for Lancaster University, or possibly ethical leadership and decision making. All right. So we'll talk about a few things today. The first question really is, what is ethics? What are ethics? Okay. There are lots of ways of looking at ethics. A really good description would be the ideas that we hold to be truest that we use to evaluate our behavior and the behavior of other people. All right. Some of these are things we learn in childhood, right? So be kind to people, treat adults with respect, let other people go first, share. Things like these can be the kind of ethics that we learn in childhood. As a child, we realize that things are very sort of black and white. Things are right, things are wrong. There tend not to be a whole lot of grays with children. More nuanced views of ethics happen as we get older. And again, we realize that suddenly things are very gray in certain areas, although there are still absolutes. And there are things that we as human beings believe to be completely true, which can be challenging when other people believe something different equally as strongly as we do. All right? But then when we move past people, we start looking at organizations. And organizations have ethical codes, ethical viewpoints, thoughts, things like that. And again, if we're really lucky, organizations, perhaps like this university, have written out codes of conduct in terms of ethics, in terms of talking about how individual people within the context of their position, like the one I'm currently applying for, operate. Okay? So let's jump forward a little bit, okay? This is an example of an ethical statement from Plymouth State University, which to my knowledge is a comparator or a competitor school, okay? If we take a look at it for a second, we learn a few things, okay? The opening line says, as teachers, professors encourage the free pursuit of learning in their students. This really operates, and says really clearly, again, if we look over here, the first couple of sentences, really clearly articulates what a teacher does, right? We encourage the free pursuit of learning in our students. All right, awesome. That becomes a metric we can use to evaluate the decisions that we make in the classroom and in the community. This goes on a little bit more, talking about demonstrating respectfulness for our students as individuals. Again, becomes very concrete in this particular instance. And it allows someone working for the university to understand that respect is paramount, which hopefully folks who are in education realize as well, but still. And then we get down to a few more things. They respect the confidential nature of the relationship between students and professors. Again, realizing that there's a role of a teacher, there's a role of a student, and while those are collaborative, they are in a lot of ways mutually exclusive in terms of expectations in certain areas. And then lastly, they acknowledge significant academic or scholarly assistance from them, and they protect their academic freedom. And I think that, again, really speaks to a core value of a professor, of a teacher, and really understanding that it is important for the teacher to respect the academic perspective and work of a student. Okay, so this is just an example. I was unable to find one for our agency, but again, worth looking at, I think. But really, what makes a good leader, right? And I think that becomes entirely important. These are really my three tenets of leadership from my perspective. The first is that leading is an active verb. I'm an English teacher. I come from an English background, so perhaps a little bit of English humor, right? And really that leadership is a responsibility that requires action. It requires folks to understand that this is not a position or responsibility where one can sit in the back and kind of watch things happen. One has to have a vision, one has to listen, one has to speak, one has to do. Second are that leaders lead from everywhere, wherever they're needed. There's an old adage that talks about leaders who lead from the front, leaders who lead from the back, leaders who lead from the middle. And I think a leadership position and someone who is an effective leader is really willing to do whatever is required. Whether they're the visionary talking in front of a room, or whether they're part of a team down in the dirt, or they're in the back making sure that everyone who needs help in achieving the goal can get the help that they need. All right. And then lastly, again, what is the sort of role of a leader? Leadership requires and helps us imagine the future that we want and helps us map the way to get there. This means, I think really inherently, that a leader is going to be able to help us collectively come to our conclusions and our goals. But not only that, really talking about action steps. And again, that feeds back really into leading from wherever we need to lead from, and it is an active process. So I think, again, these are really key important factors of being a leader. So what makes me a good leader? I think that's sometimes a little uncomfortable to talk about, but from my perspective, my views on both ethics and leadership begin in the same place. This is Arthur Robinson. He's my grandfather. On the left, Arthur Robinson is 17, and this is his high school yearbook. Over here, we have Arthur Robinson at 77. They look slightly different, perhaps, but for me, really, my view on ethics and my view on being a human in a larger community stems from him. You can see his yearbook quote, "A friend to truth, of soul sincere, in action faithful, and in honor clear." I think it's interesting when I think about my grandfather and things like honesty. I think honesty really suffuses what I try to accomplish as a leader, as a person. Being genuine, being real, I think those are really important characteristics. And when I think about Bill Robinson, I think about the fact that he may have been many, many things, including, as he got older, a little curmudgeonly, but honesty was really important to him, and likewise becomes very, very important to me. And regardless of the leadership positions that I've taken, I think when we're looking at ethical behavior, honesty is really important, because if we're not honest with ourselves, with our communities, with our teams, we can't be reflective, we can't grow, and then unfortunately we become kind of inherently unethical. But let's look at a couple of things. I, as a professional, have had the opportunity to really think about what my ethical code is in terms of a leadership position. And it comes down to, again, three things, right? The first one is how we get to our goal matters as much as the goal itself. This meaning the process that we come to complete what our task is important. The ends cannot justify the means, unfortunately. So how do we create a system in which everyone can thrive, folks can have their opinions, they feel respected, they can share, and that the way we go about doing things is with high ethics and with our values. The second one is that everyone's voice is valuable. Whether you're a new employee on your first day of work or you've been the CEO of a company for 30 years, both voices are important because it gives us different perspectives. And again, sometimes having seasoned approaches is important, while sometimes having new ideas is important, and we have to find a happy medium between those voices. And lastly, teamwork makes the dream work. We have to work together. No man is an island, no person is able to do all of it themselves. It becomes really important for us to consider how do we collaborate together. And even if we're working independently.
Would all seniors please report to the gym? All seniors to the gym.
Understanding that we collaboratively together are responsible for working and achieving various goals. Again, even if we're working independently, that we are all part of a system that's united. This is a picture of our English department this year. They photoshopped pictures of us onto some lovely musicians. And this one in the senior yearbook, which was funny. Let's look at specifically things about my leadership experience. Again, I've been fortunate enough to have a variety of leadership experiences that have each taught me something. As an undergraduate, I was working in residential education at Plymouth State University as an assistant residence director, amongst other positions in which I was working collaboratively with peer groups to try to support student learning in the residential setting. If you've ever been an RA, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Again, during my undergraduate experience, I also worked with the Pakistani Educational Leadership Institute through Plymouth State University. Every summer, for about 10 years, they brought 20 professional educators from Pakistan to the United States to learn best practice. In this experience, I started learning about how other people operate and how other people work and believe, and seeing the ways folks, the countries believe education and where we're similar and where we have an opportunity to learn and grow from each other. I spent about 10 years working with high-risk adolescents. These are kiddos that the system isn't built to handle or support in a good way. And it's making sure that we realize that kids are kids. Kids require support, they require education, they require someone to listen and to care about them. And again, this is something that I take as really the base level expectation of any position working in education. How do we help support the kids, the students to learn what they need to learn, what they want to learn. I took a brief stint into substance abuse, which is an interesting situation working with adults who are recovering from opioid addiction. Again, New Hampshire has a rather substantial opioid crisis at the moment, as does Vermont. And learning again there, dealing with adults who are looking for support, sort of, but maybe not really. And then perhaps my most unique experience as a volunteer coordinator for the Wildfire Arts Retreat, which is a summer program that happens 3 or 4 times a year where professional acrobats and fire breathers and circus performers get together for a training camp. Over here on the right is a promotional image of me breathing fire. Working with volunteers is a really interesting experience as well, because there it's about cooperation and collaboration in particular. When you're in charge of a group of volunteers, the expectations are very different and nuanced. So, the position we're talking about here at Lancaster University, there's a couple of things that I think might be challenging for someone entering the position. One, we're going to have to support student learners. Students are learning at various different levels, at different speeds, looking for different things. And our job is to try to support them in any way we can. Number 2, juggling competing priorities. A position like this requires a lot of balancing between what I need to do today and tomorrow, what then changes when a student comes into the office in a crisis, or we decide that we're going to launch a new initiative, or someone's out of work for today and we need to carry their caseload. It happens sometimes, but can be a challenge as we sort of juggle all of our various priorities, which is why our values become important, because again, what gets bumped to the top of the list, what gets bumped to the bottom of the list, depends a lot on what we value. And then lastly, there are going to be stakeholders. There are going to be folks who in the provost office who are going to have opinions. There are folks among the teaching lecturers who are going to have opinions. There are folks who are going to want and have a variety of viewpoints. And it becomes really important to consider those as well. I also have 3 ways that I think we can navigate these waters. The first is that we have to make sure that we're reflective in what we're doing. We need to consider what we've done, how we got there, did it work, did it not work? And I think that becomes really important, and honestly is oftentimes, if we don't prioritize it really clearly, something that falls off the wagon one we're out of time. Number 2, we need to engage in dialogue. We have to be able to talk to each other as a team, as a unit, as a larger part of the university, and really understanding that we're all in this kind of together. And then lastly, again, reinforcing our commitments to ourselves, to each other, and making sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of what we're here to do. If that is what's driving us, we can deal with the rest of whatever falls our way. Okay? So a couple of things as well when we think about leadership and ethics. There's a couple of points that I think are worth discussing and mentioning, and some theories attached to it. I won't go into super depth about it because, again, it's a short presentation, but I think they're important. Okay. The first one is talking about moral imagination. Moral imagination is this idea that we can envision other people's perspectives and other people's priorities. By doing that, we can understand how they operate and what they value. And if we can understand that, that then allows us the opportunity to have a growth in dialogue. And also give us the opportunity to think about what we would do in a particular situation before that situation develops, which is important. Second is that character as a human being develops over time. It depends on our experiences, depends on the things that we have in common with one another. And also understanding that everyone on a given team is at a different place in their own character development. Some have had opportunities that others haven't, some have had challenges that others haven't, and as much as we are the same and working collaboratively together, we all have different opinions, which adds a whole lot of value to our discussions. Again, being reflective in our decision-making process is really vital. We have to look at what we do and how we do it. And if we don't, we fall into habits that maybe aren't as successful as we might want them to be, We may find ourselves in positions where we think we're doing the right thing and we're not, and there are just some pitfalls attached to that. And lastly, leadership, not lastly, but second to last, leadership offers the ability to transform. This goes back, I think, to my viewpoint that leadership is an active verb. You have to do something with it. We have the opportunity to take a team and build something and grow something and collaborate and work together to achieve this goal. And then lastly, that organizations and agencies are part of a larger society. Again, this is really important for a couple of reasons because we have an obligation to be good custodians within the communities we exist in. This is really important for universities and colleges as well. We take up a lot of space in towns. Folks have various opinions about higher education, and by interacting with the community as a whole, we build partnerships, we build goodwill, and really understand that we're not just some random place up on the hill doing other stuff that has no connection to the community. So these are all really, really important. Again, these mostly come from Johnson. There are page numbers over here, 48, 68, 146, 178, 248, and 312. Again, really good viewpoints, and from my perspective, the pieces that I pull away when I think about how my ethics and my professionalism and my leadership interact with one another. So in closing, I think there's a few things we're thinking about leadership, about ethics, about positions in education. The first is that you have to have ethics, and that there's an active participation required to be an ethical person. You cannot sit on the sidelines and watch it happen. Number two, you need to think about things, and you need to consider things, and that sometimes that can be hard, and it can require time and commitment to really evaluate yourself in an honest way, and your group and your team as a whole. Third is that education is really fast, and the least expected occurs all the time, right? If we're thoughtful about things, if we're thorough, if we're imaginative, we can then meet the needs of the people that we're here to support, which is, again, at the end of our day, our job. If we think about it, we can see it, we can deal with it. And then lastly, the school is a team. Okay? Every school, every team is made up of individual people, all of whom have different ideas, and I think by collaborating together, we have the opportunity to work together. Again, I think of that, my experience with the Pakistani Educational Leadership Institute, 20 teachers from a foreign country, all of whom coming from very, very different places, together with a shared goal and a shared dream. So those are my thoughts at the moment. All right, thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.